Welcome to the Experience Fit Life podcast. Today I am really excited to share this topic. I actually was working on this probably 2-3 weeks ago, and it just was so good. I was listening to a podcast from Ed Milet, and he was talking about this phrase, cognitive immobility. And it was just so interesting, and I wanted to share something with you guys. So basically, I want you to imagine trying to drive your car while only looking in the rearview mirror. Obviously, it's not going to work. You might stay on the road for a little while. You might even avoid a few obstacles because you've traveled that road before. Sometimes I think about, we get on autopilot, like, how did I just get home? But we've traveled that road so many times that it's just autopilot. But if you're looking in the rear view mirror, eventually you are going to miss the turn that's right in front of you. You're going to drift off course because you're trying to move forward while keeping your eyes fixed on what's behind you. And I think that's how a lot of people unintentionally live their lives. Not because they want to, not because they're lazy, but because the mind naturally looks backward before it looks forward. So today I want to talk about this idea that I think affects almost everyone, if not everyone, whether we realize it or not. It's the tendency that we all have to let our past become the filter through which we see our present and our future. And if we're not careful, that filter can quietly become what I would call a prison. And maybe you've experienced this. You start a new relationship, but because someone has betrayed you, betrayed your trust years ago, you assume that that person eventually will too. Or you get a new opportunity at work, but because you've failed before, you convince yourself that you're probably going to fail at it again. Or someone gives you constructive feedback, and instead of hearing encouragement, your mind immediately connects it to criticism that you have experienced in the past. So the event itself isn't creating your reaction, your history is. So what's fascinating is that it's actually how our brains are designed to work. Our brains are incredible pattern recognition machines. God created it this way for a reason. Every single day, our brain is asking one question: have I seen something like this before? And it's doing it for a reason. If the answer is yes, your brain pulls a file from the past and says, here's how we handled it last time. Think about working out, your muscle memory. When you worked out of the past and now you've gotten off track and then you come back in the gym, your muscles remember how to build and grow and repair from last time. And so it's easier to, get back on the wagon once you've made it back in the gym or back into working out. Your muscle memory remembers how to get there because it's done it before. So most of the time, it's incredibly helpful. It's why you don't have to relearn how to tie your shoes or get back on the bike and relearn again. It's why you recognize a friend's face instantly. It's why you think through every single stop sign or traffic light. Your brain is constantly making shortcuts. So even if when we read, our brains aren't carefully examining every individual letter the way that we might imagine. When we were in kindergarten, it took us a little longer to read, but our brains have become more efficient. So instead now, they're recognizing the familiar patterns. We've seen those combinations thousands and thousands of times, so our minds quickly fill in the blanks. So without those mental shortcuts, reading this conversation would take forever. Our past makes life more efficient. But here's the problem, and here's the important thing that I wanted to talk to you about. The same system that helps us recognize words also influences how we interpret experiences. Sometimes we're not responding to what's actually happening. We are responding to what happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or maybe when we were 12 years old. It's almost like our brain has labeled certain situations with sticky notes, like red alert, danger, or red alert, rejection, failure, you're not good enough. Then whenever something remotely similar happens, those labels automatically pop back up, like a computer, hack alert or, virus alert. It's like, watch out. And So it's not because that what's happening is true or whatever, it's because they're familiar. And I think that's why so many people feel stuck, not physically, mentally, emotionally. They've moved to a new city, but they're still living inside old disappointments, or, maybe starting a new career, but still carrying the identity from their last failure. Even entering healthy relationships, but you just have inside of you that this will have an unhealthy outcome like last time. And so it's like trying to write today's story with yesterday's script. Imagine an actor showing up to the wrong movie set. Everyone else is filming a comedy, but he's reading lines from a tragedy. Nothing makes sense. The people around him are confused. He's confused. I'm confused. Not because he's untalented. He's just simply operating from the wrong script. And we can do exactly that. We bring old scripts into a new season. One failed business becomes, I'm not entrepreneurial. Or one difficult relationship becomes, nobody can be trusted. One embarrassing moment becomes, I'm not confident. And notice what happens. An event slowly becomes our identity. And identities are powerful because they quietly influence almost every decision that we make. If I believe that I'm bad with money and choose that identity, then I will unconsciously make financial decisions that reinforce that belief. If I believe I'm unhealthy, I will find evidence to support it and eat some more brownies. If I believe that I'm not disciplined, every setback becomes proof. The past doesn't just become something that happened, it becomes the lens through which I interpret everything else. So think about wearing sunglasses. This is the best analogy that I like to use because it's just simple and it just makes sense in my brain. But if we're wearing sunglasses and if the lenses are blue, eventually you stop noticing the glasses. You just assume the whole world is blue. You get used to it. And that's what limiting beliefs do. You stop realizing that you're looking through a filter. You assume that you're seeing reality, but maybe you're only seeing your interpretation of reality. And same with one person to another. My interpretation might be looking at those blue lenses, and my husband's might be looking through a pair of red lenses, and we're just seeing it differently. So this is why, two people can go through the exact same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person experiences failure and says, I'll never try that again. And another person experiences failure and says, now I know what doesn't work. It's the same event, but just a different interpretation and a different future. So I think one of the greatest gifts that we can develop is the ability to ask ourselves a simple question. Is this actually true, or is this just familiar? And it's a powerful distinction because familiar and true are not always the same thing. Just because you've always believed something doesn't automatically make it accurate. Just because you've always talked to yourself a certain way doesn't mean that it's the voice that you should keep listening to. Growth often begins when we become curious about the stories we've been telling ourselves. Maybe you've been saying, I'm always anxious. And instead ask, have I experienced anxiety, or have I just decided that anxiety is who I am? Those are two very different things. One is an experience and one is an identity. And experiences change. We can allow them to change. Identities tend to keep us where we are. And I've noticed something interesting about people who continue growing throughout their lives. They aren't necessarily the smartest or most talented. They simply have an unusual willingness to let go of old conclusions. They're willing to update their thinking. Think about your phone for a second. Every so often it needs a software update. The phone itself might be perfectly fine, or, for the time being. The hardware isn't broken. It just needs new programming. Imagine refusing every update for the next 10 years, if a phone were to last that long. Eventually, the apps are going to stop working right. Things are going to become slower and slower and slower. And some features stop functioning altogether. And the phone isn't bad. It's just simply running outdated software. Sometimes we do the same thing mentally. We are trying to navigate today's opportunities with yesterday's programming. So we are living in this time in this year with beliefs that we formed in middle school, high school, or just one painful chapter of our lives. Maybe those beliefs protected us back then, and that's okay. Maybe they served a purpose, but not every survival strategy deserves a permanent place in your future. Imagine carrying around an umbrella because it rained one time. At first it made sense, but 20 years later you are still holding on to it every sunny day. Your arm's probably getting tired, and it's taking up one less thing that you could be holding on to something better. Eventually, the umbrella is going to become heavier than the rain ever was. And sometimes we carry emotional umbrellas exactly like that. Old fears, disappointments, assumptions, not because they're helping us anymore, simply because we've gotten used to carrying them. And so I want you to remember this. Your brain values certainty more than possibility. Even negative certainty often feels safer than positive uncertainty. That's why people stay in jobs that they hate. That's why relationships they stay in that drain them. Habits they desperately want to change, because familiar discomfort feels safer than unfamiliar growth. It reminds me of, I'm going to try to remember this the right way, the dog with a thorn in his side, and he's howling and howling on the front porch step, and it's like, what is going on? Every time you sit down, you just keep howling and howling, but you're not willing to take out the thorn on your side. And if you only just did that little extra moment of pain to pull out that thorn, you wouldn't keep howling and howling every time you want to sit down. And so think about maybe hiking through a forest. If you always walk the same trail, eventually the path becomes obvious. It's easy, comfortable, predictable. But creating a brand new trail requires pushing through branches. It requires, making a new way, maybe stomping on a couple weeds, stepping over rocks, walking where nobody has walked before. And it's uncomfortable. And our thinking works the same way. Every repeated thought strengthens a familiar mental pathway. And that's why changing the way you think isn't about one motivational speech. It's about repetition. It's about practicing new thoughts until they become familiar enough to compete with the old ones. One encouraging conversation isn't enough. One journal entry isn't enough. One workout isn't enough. Transformation happens through repetition. And that's true physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Every time you choose courage over fear, you're carving a new pathway. Every time you challenge an old belief, you are creating a new trail. And every time you keep a promise to yourself, you are teaching your brain a different story about who you are. And at first, it might feel awkward, and anything unfamiliar is gonna feel unnatural in the beginning. The first time you drove a car, first time you rode a bike, you're probably terrified. With a car, it's like, don't forget the mirrors, the turn signals, make sure you're braking. How do you park in the lines correctly? And so as you grow up, you don't even think about it. It just becomes a part of your process because you've done so many repetitions of that thing. Or maybe it's a new vehicle, and when you first started driving the vehicle, it felt huge and you didn't really know your borders of how close you could squeeze into that parking spot without having to back up and get more space. And now you got it. You just know. And so the same thing happens with confidence, with discipline, with gratitude, with hope. They are built through repetition, not perfection. And I also think it's important to recognize that moving forward doesn't mean pretending the past never happened. Healing is not denial. It's not ignoring painful experiences. It is learning from them without allowing them to define every future experience. There's wisdom in remembering, but there's danger in living there. The rearview mirror exists for a reason. You glance at it, but you don't drive by it. And maybe somebody listening today experienced betrayal, and it hurt, it mattered, and you have to learn from it, become wiser. But don't assume that every future relationship deserves punishment for someone else's choices. And maybe it's failing financially. You learn from it. You improve your habits, and you gain wisdom through that experience. Use it to your advantage. Become a better version of you because of it. Don't decide that your future is permanently limited because of one chapter, because life is full of chapters. Some are great, some stink, but in the end, you are going to have a beautiful story. And not every chapter deserves to become the title of the whole book. And that's one of my favorite things. A chapter is not the story. And so one difficult season does not define your identity. One painful experience does not determine your destiny. You have permission to write a new chapter right now. In fact, you're writing one every single day, whether you realize it or not. The question is whether you're writing it consciously or simply repeating the last one. So how do we become people who move forward? I think it starts with awareness. Notice your automatic thoughts. Notice the assumptions that you make. Notice how quickly your mind jumps backwards. And then ask yourself, is there another way to see this? What evidence do I actually have? What if this moment isn't the same as the last one? Because those questions create the space. And sometimes space is all we need to make a different choice. And over time, those different choices become different habits. Different habits become a different identity. And that identity begins creating a totally different life. And that's what I want for you. It's not overnight, it's not instantly, but consistent repetition, little by little, day after day, you can create this new identity for this new chapter for you. And the people who build meaningful lives aren't people who never experienced pain. They're people who refused to let the pain become their permanent address. They visit it, they learn from it, they peek at it in the rearview mirror, not to forget where they came from, but then they keep walking, they keep driving. Because life isn't asking us to forget where we've been, but it is inviting us to believe that where we've been doesn't have to determine where we're going. So maybe today is a good day to ask yourself, what story have I been repeating? What belief have I accepted without questioning? And what old script am I reading from? And one more question. What would change if I allowed myself to believe that this next chapter does not have to look like the last one? What would change for you? How would life change? What would you be doing different to make that change so that this next chapter does not have to look like the last one? And I want you to hold on to that. Even if you could press pause and just think about that question. I would love to pause with you, but you can push pause. Because your past may explain you, but it doesn't define you. The experiences behind you can become teachers instead of prison walls. You can appreciate the lessons without living inside the classroom forever. The windshield in your car is much bigger than the rear view mirror for a reason. You were designed to spend much more time looking ahead than looking back. And maybe the greatest act of courage isn't forgetting the past. It's finally believing that your future deserves more attention than your history. So, what would change if you allowed yourself to believe that this next chapter does not have to look like the last one? What would change for you? What would you do different? Thank you for joining me today. I'm so glad that you are with me today. Whenever you are listening to this, you are listening at the exact moment you are supposed to be listening to this. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.